And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
And welcome to Mob Talk Radio. I am your host, Jeff Canarsie, coming straight at you out of Brooklyn, New York. We're going to do the Angelo Bruno show today, but before we get to that, there's some news and notes. Toto Riina is dead at 87. He was also known as the Beast. He was the Sicilian boss of bosses in Cosa Nostra in Italy. He died yesterday in prison of cancer and heart-related issues. He was currently serving 26 life sentences. He was born in 1930 in Corleone, Sicily, and joined the Mafia at 19. His own father was killed by the mob when he was 13 years old. He was known as a killer, a drug trafficker. He's the one that ordered the hit on Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino, which was related to a huge explosion on the freeway, which killed both of them. And they were two judges that were actually prosecuting the Mafia at the time. This individual specifically, Toto Riina, was very deadly, very dangerous. And just to show you the differences between sort of the American Mafia and the Sicilian Mafia is that here it's very rare that anybody would hurt somebody's family member. But in Sicily, the rules are a little different. And Toto Riina there was someone who was giving the police information, and in order for Riina to stifle him, they arrested, what the fuck am I talking about? Not arrested, but they kidnapped his son, and they ended up strangling him, and then dissolved him in acid, and the age of this child was 13 years old. It's egregious, it's disgusting, I don't agree with it, but he was a very, very, very violent individual. He was insanely powerful. Everybody was afraid of him, and for good reason. So he passed away on Thursday night. Late Thursday night, would have been early Friday morning, at age 87. So that's that news. And I will cover Salvatore Toto Riina at some point, maybe next week or the week after. Also, from the Q&A from last night, I got a couple questions late this morning. Sorry, I know some of you are in the UK, so you're like a couple hours ahead, and or whatever. Maybe you didn't understand the time difference, but I did write down those questions, and I will address them on the next Q&A, which will be Q&A number 6, and that'll be coming probably not next week, probably the week after. I just want to put some distance between the Q&As. What else do we have? I was told last night that I have a fan. And this fan is Kevin Connolly, and I am absolutely sort of blown away that he listens to every show. And I'm glad he's a fan, and I'm a fan of his work as well. I have been for a long time. He is also the director of the John Gotti movie, Rise and Fall of John Gotti, which is coming out over the holiday season from what I understand. So once again, if you're not familiar with Kevin Connolly, he's been in a lot of films and Entourage and everything else. He's a huge New York Islanders fan too. I was at a young age. I actually knew Brian Trottier from a very young age. And we're not going to talk hockey on a Mob Talk show, but I was an Islanders fan as a kid till I got a little older, and then I became a Penguins fan, and I have been ever since. Mario Lemieux was my favorite player ever, but second to that was obviously Mike Bossy and Brian Trottier. So if you're unaware of who Kevin Connolly is, please check out his stuff. He's on Twitter. He has an IDMB page. He's been in a lot of films. Good director. Directed the Gotti film. So, Kevin, if you are listening, I'm a big fan of yours. So, I'm sort of blown away that you even listen to this stuff that I do. But thank you anyway for definitely listening in, and I do appreciate it. And I always welcome support and compliments. I'm not good at taking compliments, but that's just the kind of the way it is, because I never think it's as good as other people think it is. But I guess it's perspective is everything. Okay, so what else do we have going on? We've got Philadelphia. Philadelphia has turned into a powder keg. I've been talking about this for months. But really what's kind of going on now, it's sort of the spinning narrative that continues to it basically continues to go down the same path that always has gone. One of the interesting questions at this point, and there's an article that we put out over on the Mob Talk Radio True Crime blog. You can go to Facebook, type in Mob Talk Radio. You'll see links to that there. I also post the links from time to time on Twitter at Mob Talk Radio, and you can follow us on Twitter at Real Mob Talk 7, as well as sometimes I post stuff on YouTube, which type in Mob Talk Radio. You'll get that as well. And also check out Scott Williams Collier. He's a buddy of mine, my business partner to some extent, as far as the writing and some of the stuff that we do. We've got projects coming later on down the line, but his stuff is really good too. He has a tendency to cover like British crime and serial killers and stuff like that. So please check out his stuff. Give him a like. He also has a YouTube page. Subscribe to that. Do him a solid there. But Philadelphia, it's really interesting. The FBI usually doesn't release information unless they got nothing. They always keep it close to the vest. John Rubio, who is the informant that was an informant for some 5 years, taped hundreds and thousands of sort of conversations between Joey Merlino and other people. And what the FBI has really had a problem with it is, and this is not breaking news, I heard that John Rubio's bail was revoked. He was sent back to jail for the way he sort of carried himself. And so that's not a good sign for the government. And the government always has to rely on the testimony of informants because it backs up their credibility and their bullshit, because half of it is bullshit, I'm not going to lie. There is a reality to that. You don't have to go too far. Greg Scarpa's one of them. Whitey Bulger's another one of them. John Connery, FBI agent. And the list goes on and on and on. There are 2 agents, FBI agents, that are specifically involved in the John Rubio case. Both of them were investigated. One is an FBI supervisor. The first one was cleared. The second one was suspended. That's big news. That's really big news. That shows misconduct on behalf of the FBI. So when you have something like that going on, a misconduct issue, especially when how evidence is handled in the chain of command of evidence, that's a real for the FBI. So what does the FBI do at this point? Because of the 48, 49 co-defendants, the only 2 that did not accept, I think there was like 4 that didn't accept a plea deal, but the only 2 that are really being talked about, obviously, is Eugene D'Onofrio and Joey Merlino. Obviously, those trials are going to be split and separated for good reason. Rooster D'Onofrio does not really want his trial to coincide with Merlino at the same time. I think he feels like if it's split, he has a better opportunity to beat the case. Joey is all in. Cards are all on the table. He's ready to roll. He thinks he can beat the case, and I would agree with him. I think he can too. But there is something that sort of is on the back end of this that makes this an interesting situation. What makes this interesting is that the FBI, from what I understand, from what my sources have indicated to me, is that they are trying to flip another informant. They know that John Rubio is a loose cannon. They're worried about putting him on the stand because there's a lot of things that he could say that other people can say didn't happen, subject to interpretation. Like, for example, why were certain conversations between him and Joey Merlino or any of the other co-defendants manipulated, edited, erased? Why weren't they handed it in a timely manner? Where was the chain of command? So there's a lot of problems with that, and the FBI is going to have, and the prosecution especially, is going to have a real problem prosecuting that. On the back end of that as well, you've got Florida DAs and Florida branch of the FBI is furious that there wasn't information being shared, especially when these alleged Medicaid fraud stuff was going on down in Florida. So, I mean, you got all of these little tangible little things. The other interesting facet is, like I said, the FBI is trying to turn another snitch out of this. Anthony Nicodemo, who is sentenced to God knows how long, 36 years in prison, very young guy, goes to prison, keeps his mouth shut. All of a sudden, the FBI moves him from one federal prison to another prison very close to Philadelphia. And that's their reasoning was because he's been a model prisoner. You know, he wants to be closer to his family. You know, it was a good situation for him. First of all, the FBI doesn't do nobody no favors. You want to ask anybody if the FBI does any favors? Go ask the Gotti family what happened to John Gotti while he was in prison drinking tainted fucking water. How about we talk about that and how they left him in a cell to suffer. To suffer. Full-blown cancer. The guy doesn't complain. He deals with it. Like, stands up and faces it like a man. Okay? Now, you can have your arguments and say that you don't like John Gotti, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what I'm simply trying to point out is this fact. The FBI don't do nobody no favors. They never have and they never fucking will. That is the truth. So the idea that they're doing Anthony Nicodemo a favor. Not so much. Now, Anthony Nicodemo is a stand-up guy. From everything that I've heard, I don't know him, never met him, never talked to him. He's old school. He's not going to snitch on anybody. He's not going to make time easier. But then again, he's looking at doing a hefty amount of time in prison for a murder. And where the issue sort of becomes is the FBI does this for two reasons. One, they're going to apply pressure to Merlino and everybody on the streets by saying, look at Nicodemo. He was over here. Now he's over here. And what it does is it sort of builds this idea that he could be talking, which is a highly dangerous fucking thing for the FBI to do. To me, it's a scumbag move. And I don't believe for 1 second they're doing anybody any favors. They want to put the seeds of doubt in Merlino's head. They want to put seeds of doubt in everybody in Philadelphia's head that he might just talk. He could talk. And that's what the FBI needs at this point. They need somebody else to come forward and sort of corroborate what Rubio has said and what other people have said, because they want Joey Merlino like the FBI wanted John Gotti Jr. all those years. I don't know why specifically to get a hard-on for individual people, because I would think in the grand scheme of things, if I had to take myself off the streets outside the box for a minute, I would think a massive indictment would be so much better for my career than one. And I think that what you have is these egocentric people. Rudy Giuliani is one that I think about off the top of my head. Egocentric people that want to go after one person and one person only. He's public enemy number one. It's just like shit from the 50s and 40s and 60s and whatever else. Almost witch hunt type of stuff. You want to take down organized crime from that aspect of government. You want to sweep them all off the fucking carpet. You want to take them all down, not just one guy. And what you end up doing by going after one person is you limit yourself and you limit your capabilities. And this is exactly why I think Joey Merlino will walk. I don't think Anthony Nicodemo is an informant. I don't think he would ever be. But then again, I keep going back to the FBI doesn't do anybody any favors. So if they could get Nicodemo to talk, which I don't think, if somebody wanted me to lay odds at 0%, it's not going to happen. But let's play devil's advocate here for a second. If he did that, Merlino's done. Probably because Nicodemo obviously would have a lot more information. I'm not saying he would tell the truth, but when you're looking at like a 36, 37, 38-year term, you start to kind of think, for me personally, I could never do it, but you start to kind of think, you know what, this life isn't what I thought. These guys are still out making money. Nobody's helping me out. The FBI moves me closer to my family so I can spend time with them. Fuck it, I'm in a rat. This is how that happens. So the FBI does this for two reasons. They want to put doubts in Merlino's head, first of all. And the second reason why they do this is because they want to put thoughts into Nicodemo's head. He's closer to Philly. He has more access to kind of what's going on. He can hear more things. And maybe they can send their agents in to sort of groom him and pet him. I always like to call it petting because that's what it is. They pet you till you purr. They offer you something and you go with it. And that may be what they're trying to do. Put him closer to Philly. Maybe we go in and talk to him a little bit. Maybe we slowly pet him and bring him around to our side of things. Maybe he gives us information we can use. But it's a volatile situation. It's a dangerous situation. And I'm sure Nicodemo appreciates being closer to his family, but at the same time, that sends a message, and a very dangerous message at that. So according to Nicodemo's lawyer, he's not talking to anybody. He's not going to. He's just trying to do his time, and he's thankful to be closer to his family. But like I said, I want somebody to come to me and show me an instance, right, where the Federal Bureau of Intimidation does somebody a favor and doesn't want anything in return. They're definitely not going to scratch your back without turning their back and saying, okay, now scratch mine, but you better scratch longer and harder and make it feel more better, So that's what's going on in Philadelphia. It's really going to come down to two things. I don't think Rubio is going to believe it all. So there's really going to be two results here. Either Merlino at the last second will take some sort of small-ass plea deal, which he's never done in his life. He's against plea deals, and he's against talking, and he'll never do either one, he says. And history has shown that Joey doesn't do these things. But, looking at 20 years, and they say, look, we'll give you a year. He might just do it to get them off his back, but he really believes he has a strong case. I know his attorneys believe he has a strong case. There is a lot of problems with Rubio's testimony and Rubio's evidence. Even the fact that Rubio made calls from jail where he was recorded and said some things that were opposite of what's on the record officially via the FBI. So this is going to get really interesting. The trial, I believe, begins in January. I'll be more specific about that later on in the week, but that's what's going on with Philly, and it's widely believed at this point that there's going to be a power vacuum and a structure change, and that's going to come with time. You can go over to Mob Talk Radio and True Crime Blog and definitely check out the articles on Philadelphia. It's a little more in depth than I can go into on the radio at this point. That's what's going on in Philly. And the rest, as they say, is history. So just keep an eye out for what's going on there. Once again, the trial starts in January, et cetera, et cetera. Now, next week, this is the last item before we go to the break. Then we'll come back and go to Angelo Bruno. Let me say something about Angelo Bruno really quick. There is not a lot known about his youth. I was able to undig some stuff that some people may know and may not know, but there's really nothing prior to him being, like 17 and 18 years old. So, and it's minuscule. But the bigger story about Angelo Bruno, and I'll go into obviously more depth because we're doing the show on him, but the really big issue isn't so much his rise. His rise was not surprising, but his epic fall, that's what the big story is. And there's a lot of intricacies, and we'll cover that. Now, as far as next week goes, I have not figured out who I'm going to do. You guys keep suggesting a million different people. And one of the ways to communicate with me, very simply enough, you can go on Facebook, Mob Talk Radio, type that in, send me a message there. And I said this last night, but if you want to be my regular friend on Facebook, I do not accept a lot of friend requests with people I don't know. And a lot of reason is because I have my own personal page, et cetera, et cetera. But then again, sometimes I do take people just because, I look at the pictures and make sure you're a legitimate person. Because sometimes I get these things where it's like Sheena Jackson, and she has like 2 friends, and all her pictures are like buck naked. I don't deal with that. I don't want to deal with that. So if you're one of the lucky ones, I'll let you in. I just try to keep some of my personal life personal. That's just the way I am. That's the way I like to keep it. But then again, maybe I need to open the doors a little bit more. But if you reach out to me on Twitter at RealMobTalk7, or you reach out to me on Facebook via Mob Talk Radio, I will respond. Either I will or Scott will, but I definitely will respond at some point. So that's that. But as far as next week goes, we will probably do, I don't know what I'm going to do specifically. I may do a Q&A, but I really try not to do that too much because then it just kind of gets overflowed. But any suggestions that anybody might have, just send them over to me at Mob Talk Radio, either on Twitter in my inbox or Facebook in my inbox. And I'll take your consideration in, and we'll try to figure it out. But probably by Tuesday, you'll know who I'm going to do. But if you have suggestions in the meantime, just send them on over to me. Anyway, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to get to Angelo Bruno. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. I am your host, Jeff Canarsie. And as I was saying, sort of at the top of the show, there's not a lot known about Angelo Bruno as far as his... there are facts about his rise, but if you're looking for intricate things like when he was 16 years old, he robbed this bank, he robbed that bank, and then he met this guy, and then he met this guy, there's not a lot known. And maybe that's a testament to how crafty he was, and how secretive he was, because the Docile Don, which is his nickname, because he had a penchant for using tactics that were nonviolent. He was sort of a delegator. He was a guy who said, peace is better, money is better, let's not get violent. It didn't stop him from getting violent, because there were instances where he was. But for the record, Angelo Bruno will go down as, obviously in history as a don. However, he didn't meet a good end. And I wish there was more information as far as really how he got his bump and grind going in the early days. I have a little bit of information, but it's probably not as extensive. And I'm going to have a tendency here to focus on why Angelo Bruno was assassinated and who the players were involved in that, because that's a lot bigger to me than sort of the middle ground stuff. And it also shows that Philadelphia, who is dubbed the gang that couldn't shoot straight, why they have never been able to sustain for very long. Because prior to or during Bruno's reign, 20-some years, they kept going and were profitable and were making money and staying off the radar. But then as Bruno is killed, everything just absolutely falls apart, obviously, because Chicken Man Testa and Nicky Scarfo. Then there's John Stanfa, Ralph Natale, Joey Merlino. So it gets worse and worse and worse. And it's all sort of a schism effect of Bruno getting whacked. It changes the map in Philadelphia. And there's a lot of players that are involved in this. So let's get right to it. Angelo Bruno was born Angelo Sammartino in Villaba, Sicily in 1910. He arrives in the 1920s in Philadelphia. At the time, Salvatore Sabella was the boss of the Philadelphia crime family. In his late teenage years, Bruno begins performing armed robberies, bookmaking, and shylocking, and eventually sort of catches the attention of Salvatore Sabella. Sabella immediately sees potential in Bruno because he was fairly quiet, reserved, but he could delegate authority very, very, very well. Now, when I say there's not much known, what I simply, more specifically mean is not a lot is known about how he ascends, as far as how he goes from a soldier to a capo, etc., etc. That part of history has really always been clouded in mystery. I did so much research on this, and I could not believe, and I knew a lot about Bruno to begin with, because Philadelphia is one of my favorite topics, but there's just not a lot that I could back up to be, absolutely 100% true. Gossip is gossip, and I don't like to talk about gossip unless I can get my hands on something evidentiary anyway that can prove without a shadow of a doubt, where I could say, okay, it could have been A or B, but here's the evidence I have that supports A or B, you decide. And that's what I try to do here as much as I can. And a lot of people don't like that. A lot of people don't like the truth, and the truth is the truth, and a lot of people think that I have personal assertions, opinions, and feelings about certain people over another, and I do. But I have an opinion. I'm allowed to have that. So, all of that being said, Sabella, brings him around because he notices that Bruno's smart, he's making money, and he feels like he can be trusted. So what he ends up doing is he brings him in, and he allows him to start his own gambling. And what he really does is he allows Angelo Bruno to get involved in a bootlegging operation. In 1927, Sabella is deported back to Italy, and John Avena officially becomes the new boss of Philadelphia. In 1931, Angelo Bruno becomes a made man in the Mafia. In 1934, Bruno forms a partnership with Carlo Gambino, which had to do with a large, lucrative land transaction. As far as the land transaction, it was something that was bought sort of on the arm, so to speak. And Bruno came across it and realized that there could be a potential at some point for him and Carlo Gambino to make some money off of it. So he includes Carlo Gambino in that transaction, and Gambino never forgets it. And that alliance literally saves Bruno's life in one instance, but at the other, Carlo can only do so much for Angelo Bruno. Moving right along, in 1959, Joe Ida takes over. In 1959, Joe Ida was already the boss, and he effectively retires and makes Antonio Polina the boss of the Philadelphia. And Ida had really two choices when he decided he wanted to retire. He could either effectively allow Antonio Polina to become boss, or he could allow Angelo Bruno to become boss. He decided on Polina. Polina accepted it, but there's a problem. And what the problem is that even though Angelo Bruno was in full support of Ida's decision, he would back Polina. He wasn't about to buck the system. He wasn't about to talk subversive. He was okay with it. Polina was intimidated and sort of worried about Bruno. Bruno was making a lot of money. He seemed very smart. He was very quiet. He didn't like to murder. He didn't like to use violence as a way to resolve things, and it effectively made Polina, from the aspect of ego, worry that, here's Bruno, he's this rising star. I'm going to really have to watch myself, because if I don't, this guy could fully take over the crime family. And so what Polina decides is, well, Angelo Bruno's got to fucking die. That's the only way that they can deal with it. Kill him. He's no longer concerned, out of sight, out of mind, and I can continue to run the family. The problem is that Bruno sort of finds out that this is going on behind his back. So what Bruno does is he goes to see Carlo Gambino. He explains to Gambino that Polina wants to kill him. He doesn't understand why. He fully supports him. He would never do anything to talk subversive. It's all about the family growth. It's all about making money, and he just doesn't understand what Polina's problem is. Gambino kind of looks at him and just kind of laughs it off and says, don't worry, nobody's going to touch you. As a matter of fact, Polina's going to get killed. Why don't we just kill him? That's what we're going to do. We're going to kill him. And then he effectively makes Angelo Bruno the boss of the Philadelphia crime family. Once he says, you know what, you're the boss now. Polina's done. We'll kill him. It's over with. You're the boss now. A few weeks later, after he becomes boss, which there were rumors that there was going to be a mob war between Polina and Bruno. And what ends up happening is Gambino effectively sits down with Bruno again and says, listen, what do you want to do about Polina? If you want him to go, not a problem. I have no problem. I'll pull the trigger, or I'll pull my guys in. They'll take care of it. You can take care of it. What do you want to do? And this is what Bruno does. And this shows his resolve. He realized that if he killed Polina, how it would look. It would look like he was greedy. It would look like revenge, and it would upset a lot of the old guard in the Philadelphia crime family. He says, no, Carlo, that's not what I want to do. Look, I'm the boss. Let him stay in the family. Let him make his money. I am not going to risk upsetting the old timers, and I'm not going to risk upsetting those that support him by killing him. It's going to make them angry, and it's going to create problems. So just let him do what he's always done. And Polina accepts it, and pretty much everything goes on as the way it should. And I think that's really a testament to Bruno's resolve. I don't think a lot of guys in his position, I know Vito Genovese sure as fuck wouldn't have done that. There would have been bullets everywhere. So the idea that he saw it as, you know what, this is being given to me. Carlo Gambino at the time is obviously the boss of the Gambino crime family and one of the strongest bosses and most powerful bosses in New York City at the time, lent itself to the fact that it's easier to make people happy than to start a war over nothing, and that's exactly what he did. So as boss, Angelo Bruno effectively ruled very quietly, and for the most part, he only dealt in traditional rackets. Bookmaking, shylocking, prostitution, bid rigging, labor racketeering, unions, politics, etc., etc., etc. However, there was one exception to this rule. He refused to allow anybody in his family to deal drugs, and that would also come back to haunt him. But prior to that, there was an instance where Bruno did decide to get violent. And the reason is because there was a certain member, not a member, but an associate of the mob, who was effectively going around robbing bookmakers. And Bruno effectively ordered his death and goes to Nicky Scarfo. He explains to Scarfo, this guy's robbing people, he's got to go. And Bruno pretty much lays out how he wants this done. What ends up happening is the victim ends up going to a bar where he was strangled and stabbed to death. Bruno then orders Nicky Scarfo to dump the body in the woods where another crew had already dug a grave. So leave the body there. Scarfo was then told that another crew would simply handle the rest, just leave the body and go. So Scarfo shows up, drops the body off, and leaves. A couple hours later, Bruno sent two of his most trusted allies to pick up the body and bury it somewhere else. And the reason why he did that was to sort of protect himself from the idea that Nicky Scarfo might know too much. I don't want to leave a trail. I don't want anybody to know where and when this happened. So if Scarfo turns around and tries to rat, says, oh, well, the body's right here, and they dig it up, there's nothing there, and he looks like a liar. So he was very smart and cognizant of the fact, even in those days, that the idea of someone being an informant was too much to risk, and that's why he did what he did. So, like I said, Angelo Bruno was totally against drug trafficking, and he refused to allow any of his men to traffic in drugs. But it also didn't, it created a problem, and it created a massive problem. And here's the thing. When you're a boss of a family, okay, and Philadelphia territorially has always been small. They have 5 rackets. They dabble in a little bit in upstate Pennsylvania, a little tiny bit in central Pennsylvania, New Jersey, but New Jersey is split by everybody for the most part. Parts of Delaware, Virginia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, guys on the street were starving. And this sort of is a reoccurring theme. We've talked about this, especially when you look at like the Gambino crime family under Paul Castellano. Same sort of deal. In fact, this part right here is going to directly lead back to Paul Castellano as well, for many reasons. So what effectively, guys are on the streets, they're struggling to make money. Narcotics are a big money maker, and a lot of the guys want to sell drugs. You know, they want to make their money. So the problem is Bruno's like, absolutely not. You're not going to do this. It's too much heat. It's going to bring the DEA, the FBI. But the problem is he's allowing Rosario Gambino out of Cherry Hill to traffic in tons of heroin and coke. Now, what this this is Carlo Gambino's cousins, i.e. Paul Castellano's cousins. They were representative of the Gambino crime family. They essentially were put in Cherry Hill, New Jersey to traffic in drugs. First of all, a lot of guys in Philadelphia looked at that as, it's our turf. You're going to tell us we can't sell drugs, but you're letting these guys sell drugs? And yet you're going to take profits from this? And that was the other issue, is that Angelo Bruno was taking massive profits from the Gambinos, and it was sort of kind of a deal with, you know, Rosario, Gambino, and other people are going to be here. They're going to move drugs out of Cherry Hill. You'll get your percentage, blah, 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 blah. And it just infuriated everybody on the streets because they felt like they were starving. Here they are fighting over 10 fucking rackets in Philadelphia and a little bit New Jersey, Delaware, and other places, but they're not making their ends meet. They're not making money. Not that Angelo Bruno was being greedy in any sense of the word as far as not allowing them to earn, but he was sort of suffocating them at the same time, and guys just didn't like it. The other thing that guys on the street were having a problem with was that Bruno allowed the Genoveses to operate inside of New Jersey as well, and inside of Philadelphia, and that was a problem for them. Why are we allowing everyone and their fucking mother to come to Philadelphia and inside of Jersey where we feel like we own territory, and you're going to let them earn, but then you're going to tell us we can't sell drugs, and they're making money off of drugs. You're taking profits from drugs. It's sort of a very hypocritical statement and sort of a hypocritical belief for him to have, and it just didn't really sit well with anybody in Philadelphia. Moving along, then there comes a time where Nicky Scarfo starts some shit. And this would cause another problem for Angelo Bruno. And this goes back to 1954. Nicky Scarfo is inducted into the Mafia by Joe Ida. And Bruno, when Scarfo was inducted into the mob, Bruno sort of held his nose. He didn't like Scarfo. He thought he was too violent. He thought he was arrogant. And he never really trusted Nicky Scarfo. And that is sort of what, I don't want to say beef, because it's not really what it was. It was just more like Angelo Bruno just looked at him like he wasn't mob material. He was a nutcase. He caused problems, et cetera, et cetera. And at the end of the day, he was probably right in a lot of ways. But there were two events that cemented a long-term issue between Nicky Scarfo and Angelo Bruno. The first event was Angelo Bruno's consigliere, Joe Regnetta, had a daughter. And he really liked Nicky Scarfo, and he thought that, maybe Nicky Scarfo could marry his daughter. It was sort of like a Sicilian tradition from the old days, but not only did Scarfo say no, which embarrassed Regnetta amongst everybody in the family and even on the streets, but Nicky Scarfo took it a step further. by telling anybody who was within shouting distance or within earshot that he was not into fucking horses, which infuriated Rugnetta, and he wanted Scarfo's head on a dish, and Bruno absolutely refused to kill him because Bruno thought, you know what, we're not going to just start killing people. Yes, he insulted your daughter. So what ended up happening was there was a sit-down, and Nicky Scarfo had to pay Rugnetta $10,000 for the insult, to which Nicky Scarfo laughed the whole entire time. He was, handing the money over, further insulting Rugnetta, and Rugnetta, till the day he died, wanted Nicky Scarfo dead. But anyway, Nicky Scarfo pays the fine, and everything is peaceful and somewhat quiet in Philadelphia. Then, a couple of years later, Nicky Scarfo was in the Oregon diner with Joey Merlino when Scarfo gets into an argument over his seat with an Irish longshoreman who was loosely connected to Bruno and some unions, and Nicky ends up stabbing the man to death with a butter knife over a seat. Nicky ends up getting arrested. He goes to prison for 10 months. And Angelo, at this point, has had enough of Nicky Scarfo. He's creating problems. He's killed a guy who was loosely connected to some unions that we run over a fucking seat of all things. He insulted Rugnetta by refusing to marry his daughter, and then basically said that he wasn't going to have sex with the horse. Well, those were the exact words he actually used, which would simulate or signal that she was fat and not so good looking. So now we have two major problems. Bruno's pissed. He doesn't trust him, doesn't like him anyway. So what he effectively does is sends Nicky Scarfo to fucking New Jersey to perish. At the time, there was really nothing in New Jersey for Nicky Scarfo. It was dead. This was prior to 1977 when the Gambling Act in New Jersey comes to town, which brought the Atlantic City casinos. So Nicky effectively goes to New Jersey and sort of dwindles around there, barely making ends meet, but would cement ties to New York, especially in Vincent the Chin Gigante, which would later benefit him after Philip Testa was killed in an explosion. But anyway, in 1977, the Gambling Act of New Jersey is amended, and the casinos were coming. The problem was that Bruno declared Atlantic City open territory. This further pissed off the entire family. First of all, it's Atlantic City. The mob from Philadelphia owns Atlantic City. They always technically have. Nicky Scarfo's hanging out in Margate in Atlantic City. So it infuriates everybody. Bruno always felt that it was better to share in the casinos with all the families, because if he didn't, then there would be a war over the casinos in Atlantic City, and he did not want to go to war over casinos, and he just felt like it was better for everybody to share in the wealth. So I can understand that perspective, but the signal and the sign that it sends to the people underneath you is that he's more loyal to the New York mob than he is to his own family. These guys are starving on the streets. They can't sell drugs. They can't make money in certain kind of ways because of the territory and because of the small area they work in. So now you mean to tell me we can't make a fucking dime off Atlantic City? Like, are you fucking nuts? So I can see from both perspectives why that went down the way they did. Guys are starving on the streets. They're starting to get more and more upset, and that instance combined with the Atlantic City instance combined with the no drug selling policy while he was taking profits from drugs being sold out of Cherry Hill by Gambino representatives, and the fact that he was allowing the Genovese family to encroach in New Jersey and Philadelphia, that sealed Bruno's fate. People were tired of it. They wanted change, and they wanted it as soon as possible. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to continue talking about Angelo Bruno. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. We are talking about Angelo Bruno. So we know a couple of things right now. Angelo Bruno is in trouble. He's under indictment for hearing at this point. He's getting a little older. He leaves Atlantic City as territory. He refuses to let anybody sell drugs unless they're from another crime family, but yet he's taking profits from it. Tired of it. And there's one guy in particular that absolutely is tired of it, and that's Anthony Caponigro. And Anthony Caponigro was the consigliere under Angelo Bruno, and he was infuriated, just like everybody else was, that there just seemed to be a double standard when it came to how Angelo Bruno dealt with things. He felt like Angelo Bruno was filling his pockets and being subversive, subservient to New York City. And so Capo's soldiers and associates start to get Caponigro's ear. They start to make inroads with him, putting ideas in his head that they would probably support different, a regime change. And Capon realizes with Bruno under indictment that if there's ever going to be an opportunity, now is the time. And Caponigro also wanted to put sort of a cap on methamphetamines. He had access to methamphetamines, had a lot of contacts, and he knew that it was a $100 million deal if he could put it together. But as long as Bruno was alive, that was just never going to happen. There was too much money and too much power at stake for Caponigro not to make his move. So what Caponigro does is he effectively goes to New York and he sits down with his friend Frank Thierry, who was at the top of the Genovese crime family at the time. And one of the interesting things is Funzi Thierry and Caponigro had a long history of not liking each other, and it went back a decade or so more. Effectively, what had happened was Frank Thierry had rackets in Philadelphia and in New Jersey, and he was representative of the Genovese crime family. Caponigro took exception to this and started moving in on Thierry's rackets and trying to take them over. And we can argue that he was in his right to do that, considering that was not Genovese territory. And what ends up happening is there's a commission meeting. Bruno sides with Caponigro over the issue, and all of the rackets that Thierry ran were taken from him and given to Caponigro. And Funzi Thierry never fucking forgot it. Never forgot it for a minute. He had a long memory of that debacle. And what ends up happening, so as we move along, is Caponigro goes to see Frank Thierry, and what is interesting is the rackets that Thierry had in Philadelphia and in New Jersey were all numbers rackets. So there's a lot of money that he lost, and he never really trusted Caponigro. And so what ends up happening is Caponigro sits down. It sort of gives the rundown of what's going on in Philly, and he sort of lays out the groundwork for murder and the hostile takeover of the Bruno regime. Funzi Thierry says, you know what, that's a good idea. I agree with you. I think it's good. And listen, worst case scenario, if the shit hits the fan and the commission gets a hold of this, which they evidently probably will, if they get involved, I will stand next to you and say that you did the right thing and that I backed you and everything should be okay. So Caponigro goes back to Philadelphia, believing that the hit on Angelo Bruno had effectively been sanctioned by the commission, which I don't know how the fuck he could have thought that. I never took that from that particular situation, but he thinks he's got backing from a powerful guy, and that's what was important. So he gets back to Philly. He recruits his brother-in-law, Alfred Salerno, Frank Sindone, and John Sindone, and on March 21st, 1980, Bruno gets whacked while sitting inside of John Stampa's car outside of his house. John Stampa is sitting in the car and doesn't get shot, and that's going to present a conspiracy theory of mine, and I don't really think it's conspiracy. I think it's bull. I think it's fucking fact at this point, which we'll get to in a second. But Bruno ends up getting shot and killed. When the commission finds out, effectively what happens is Caponigro is told to come to New York, and he does. And Vincent Gigante, prior to this, said, I'll handle this commission, don't you worry about it, let me be the overseer of this won't be a big deal. What a lot of people don't realize is Vincent Gigante was in full support of Angelo Bruno getting killed. He may not have been vocally, but as this story kind of winds up here, I will explain into further details. Anyway, Caponigro arrives. He explains his situation to Vincent the Chin Gigante. And then he, realizing that it's not going his direction, he looks at Frank Thierry, who is literally standing in the same room listening to this, and says, well, he fucking okayed it. He knew all about it. He said to go ahead and do it. It was okay with you guys. That's the only reason why I acted. Gigante turns to Thierry and says, is this true? And Thierry says, I don't know what the fuck he's talking about. He's making this up. I never had anything to do with this. I would never sanction a hit on another mob boss. Are you crazy? Genovese shakes his head, sides with Thierry, and as soon as the meeting is over, Caponigro was murdered. He was found in the trunk of a car in the South Bronx with 14 bullet and knife wounds in his body. Inside of his mouth and ass were $100 bills, sort of sending a sign that he was greedy. And effectively, after Caponigro is killed, Thierry gets every single racket he lost to Caponigro in Jersey handed right back to him. There were 16 guys that were killed after Angelo Bruno was murdered. So Gigante took it upon himself to make sure Philadelphia got spanked for what happened. But the bottom line is look at what happens after Caponigro is killed. Thierry gets all his rackets back, which means more money coming into the Genovese crime family, more money for Vincent the Chin Gigante. We have seen this before from Vinny the Chin, multiple times. He tried to kill Costello. He had given permission, but not given permission for Paul Castellano to get killed. So at the end of the day, Gigante is a master manipulator. Gigante also wanted Nicky Scarfo to run the family in Philadelphia. But when Bruno's killed and they offer the position to Chicken Man Testa, first it was offered to Scarfo. Scarfo says, no, don't worry about it. Let Testa go ahead and just kind of do his thing, and I'll just wait. Secretly, one of the biggest regrets that Vincent Gigante ever had was making a pathway for Nicky Scarfo, because Nicky Scarfo tore the Philadelphia crime family down to the ground. He's a psychopath, serial killer, etc., etc. And so that's sort of what happened to Bruno. For 30-plus years, he was able to stay at the top as a mob boss and not have a lot of problems. But the minute he stopped backing his own men, the minute that he began to think what was better for the Mafia, not the Philadelphia Mafia, but for the Mafia in general, is when he started having problems. Now, we can argue whether Caponigro did the right thing or not, whether it was selfish, greed, power-induced or not. But there's an awful lot of suspicious stuff when it comes to Angelo Bruno getting popped. One of the bigger suspicious things is that John Stampa, who would eventually split the Philadelphia mob and go to war with Joey Merlino and Ralph Natali, wasn't harmed at all in that hit. He's sitting right next to Angelo Bruno, and he doesn't take a pellet, doesn't take a bullet fragment, doesn't even get blood sprayed on him. And then Stampa ends up getting subpoenaed to testify in the Angelo Bruno murder and refuses to do it, and ends up doing eight years in prison because he refused to talk. So they charged him with contempt of court and everything else. But the idea that John Stampa wasn't touched in that hit is bullshit to me. It smells rotten, and the reason why I tell you it smells rotten is because I think John Stampa was in on that. It made sense for John Stampa to be on it. There's going to be a takeover regardless. You can either be on board or you're going to go too. And he had to have been in on it to the extent of either setting him up, being out in the car at the right time, because why else wouldn't they kill him too? The last thing that I can argue 2 and 4 this. Caponigro, first of all, when John Sindone and Frank Sindone killed him, they had an option. They could kill Stampa too, that way there's no witnesses, which would have been the smarter way to go. Unless Stampa was involved in helping them set him up. Or on the backside of that, Caponigro was so egotistical and believed Thierry so fucking much that it really didn't matter, because there was going to be no retribution for that murder anyway. So you can pick which side of the fence you want to argue there, but I'm telling you, as God is my witness, I firmly believe John Stampa was in on that, fully knew it was going to happen, and did nothing. Otherwise, first of all, I would have shot him in the ass, that way at least, or the arm or something, to make it look like he was tried to be murdered too. That way there isn't even an issue of him being subpoenaed. I was shot too. I didn't see anything. It came out of nowhere, blah, 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 blah. But that's not what happened. And I think John Stanfa definitely was in on that. I think Nicky Scarfo knew about it. I think there's a lot more to the Bruno hit than a lot of people are ever going to say. And I don't think many inside of Philadelphia or outside of Philadelphia have ever really talked about it in terms of how Vincent Gigante was the puppet master in so many different crime families and had his hands in some of the most notorious things that happened. Listen, if it benefited the Genovese crime family, believe me, Vinny Gigante was involved. Believe me, he was involved. So did it make sense for him to, off the record, be... First of all, he knew Frank Thierry had something to do. He knew Frank Thierry told him. And what I have been told over the years, and I've known this for a long time, is that effectively when Gigante sort of knew what was going on in Philadelphia to begin with, okay? So what effectively ended up happening was he allowed Thierry to sort of tell Caponigro, yeah, go ahead and do what you want. And then they knew that they would play dumb when it came back around the other end. And the reason why Gigante did that was because the rackets that Caponigro was in control of in Philadelphia, they realized was just $100 million deal. Numbers racket, bookmaking, shylocking, extortion, etc. That's more money for the Genovese crime family. Now, would Vincent the Chin Gigante be willing to do that for money? Probably not, but there was more at stake. He wanted Nicky Scarfo in charge. He wanted a regime change. And so he did what he has done multiple times before. He, off the record, nods his head, go right ahead and do it. Then as soon as it happens, he turns, he kills a bunch of people, and then says, see, I took care of it. See, what they did was wrong. I'm not going to stand for that. It makes him look good in the eyes of the commission, and he's a fucking snake in the grass, and he was. He was a snake in the grass. He full well knew what he was doing multiple times. Castellano, same sort of deal. He may not have known it was going to happen immediately, but listen, there's no such thing as whispers in the mafia. When things went out about Castellano, other crime families were notified what was going on. Everybody, Frankie DeCicco put out feelers to other crime families, and it always came back the same. Yup. But when it came to the Genovese crime family, it was yup, but not on the record. We don't want to be vocal that we support it, but go ahead, what are you waiting for already? So then it happens. And the argument I have made, and I will continue to fucking make, is John Gotti was one of the most recognized human beings on the face of this planet in the 1980s, okay? So the idea that even in the 70s, you couldn't, get him, he was very public, he didn't hide. So anybody that wants to continue to believe the bullshit about how Gas Pipe Casso was going to kill him and how Vincent the Chin Gigante wanted him dead, whatever, they got Frankie DeCicco. He was a messenger boy. Remember that. DeCicco is the one that went to other families to explain the idea or the suggestion that it would happen. So guess what? The messenger is killed. It's an eye for an eye. It's over. It's done with. There's rackets that are split up amongst Gigante and Gotti. So there you have it. So this idea, and first of all, let me tell you something. Gas Pipe Casso, as smart as he was, couldn't shoot straight either. Let's not forget, Gas Pipe killed a lot of people that were mistaken identity. Apparently he needed fucking glasses because he killed the wrong people every time. Not every time, but the majority of the time, mistaken identity. You can only have a mistaken identity so many times. Roy DeMeo had the same problem. Mistaken identity, pop. So it's... The point I'm trying to drive home is that there were other people, co-conspirators, in Angelo Bruno's hit. Now, the question is that if Carlo Gambino had still been alive, because Gambino died in 1977, if Gambino had still been alive, would that hit have happened? And I don't think there's any fucking way that hit would have happened. I think Gambino would have protected him at all cost, and I think that had Bruno been killed if Gambino was still alive, you would have seen some shit. And I don't think that Genovese would have had the balls, excuse me, not Genovese, but Gigante would have had the balls to try that shit if Carlo Gambino was alive. There's no way he would have done that. Because as Carlo Gambino dies, for the most part, I really do believe that Vincent Gigante really became the boss of bosses at that point. I think he had the most power, he had the most clout, and then John Gotti comes along, and then that sort of power base is sort of neutral. But at the end of the day, those people that continuously say that Vinny Gigante was being there was retribution on behalf of the Genoveses for anything done to anybody else is bullshit. Get real. It's not true. It's not accurate. You have to get this loyalty and imaginary operatic view of the mafia from a film perspective and a writer's perspective, a Hollywood perspective. It doesn't happen like that. Sometimes a guy just gets killed to get killed. So for anybody that follows the Philadelphia Mafia, Bruno was killed simply because at the end of the day, he wasn't willing to allow his guys to make money. He sided with other crime families over his own, and his own men felt like he was unloyal. And the minute that happens, guess what? Pop, 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 and that's the way it goes. Historically, looking back on all kinds of different mafia tales, lore, history, that's usually the way it goes. In the instance of like Albert Anastasia, we talked about that. You can go back to my show and listen to that. Carlo Gambino is involved in that. Vito Genovese was involved in that. So the idea, and I keep hitting home on this because people keep messaging me about this specifically, in that life, the ends justify the means for a lot of actions. I'm not justifying it. I'm simply saying from the code, from the streets, that is what is accepted universally amongst anyone. So the idea that a boss never clipped another boss, or a soldier never clipped a boss, or an associate never clipped a boss, or a capo never clipped a boss, or a consigliere wasn't behind clipping a boss is bullshit. It's happened historically in the mob. It has happened historically, and it probably will never stop to some extent. Meanwhile, we don't have those kind of problems today. But the point is that people continuously make John Gotti the poster boy for what was wrong with the mob. And I'm not defending him. What I'm simply saying to you is using the argument of he killed a boss without the commission's approval, blah, 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 blah. That's not even a fucking valid argument in any sense of the imagination from a crime aspect. Because it's been done a million times before. What makes him so fucking different? It doesn't. It's the same mechanism, the same ends to justify the means for the same types of reasons. I'm not going to justify what he did. I'm not going to justify what anybody does. I'm not going to justify anybody murdering anybody. What I'm saying to you, though, is from a crime aspect. You cannot make the argument that, well, one guy did it, but, that's one thing, but that was a different time period. But this guy did it, and he's a scumbag. It doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for me. And people can have whatever the opinion they want of John Gotti. They can have whatever opinion they want of Lucky Luciano or Al Capone. Opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one, right? But I get a little perturbed at the idea of that argument because if there's one thing that I preach on this show, and I will continue to do so, I, 1, give you facts, 2, give you the stories nobody else can, 3, I give you the street perspective. Nobody else can do that. Other people can do that, but they just don't because they don't understand the streets. Sometimes it's political. Sometimes it's money. Sometimes it's because a motherfucker just doesn't like a motherfucker. It's as simple as that. But there's always an end to justify the means in everything that's done. Everyone signs the dotted line. They know what they're getting involved in. They know what they're doing. Are there innocent victims in this? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, what I strive to do is give you at least the perspective from the streets. People may not like my opinion. People tell me all the time they don't like my opinions of certain people. Well, okay. I have no problem with that. But if you're going to make that argument with me, show me proof otherwise. And nobody does. So I encourage friendly debate. I encourage sort of the back and forth of it all. I like it. But it is what it is. And that's the story of Angelo Bruno. His own actions or his own inactions led to his death. And I think, and I said this earlier, that moving past Bruno, look at what happened to Philadelphia after that. It's never been the same, right? So you can have there are historical implications of Angelo Bruno getting killed because Philadelphia went from relatively quiet to just absolutely like blood in the streets, murder and mayhem. And every boss that has come in since Angelo Bruno has failed on every level. So there's something to be said for the historic implications of that. So that's what we got for today. We will be back next week on Mob Talk Radio. You can contact us over on Twitter at RealMobTalk7. Check us out on YouTube. Like, subscribe, share. Feel free to email your hatred, your threats, your complaints, your grievances, your compliments, comments, questions, whatever. Like I said, on Twitter or over on Mob Talk Radio on Facebook. Give a like, share if you don't mind. And we will see everybody next week. Thanks for tuning in.